Good morning, class. So today we'll be covering the book of Job. Now, we have completed the Iliad in our last few classes, and as you might have read, that the book of Job is actually a part of the Old Testament of the Bible, and you would all know that the Bible is a book for the Christians, their religious book. Right, and but of course, while we are reading the book of Job, we are not looking at it from just the religious point of view. We are trying to also understand the significance of book of Job as a literary work, right? So while we are, while we're in the class and while we are reading this up, we have to remember that we are studying the book of Job as literature rather than actually looking at it as a religious text only, right? So, of course, let us first initiate ourselves, familiarize ourselves with the Bible itself. So, the Bible, the word Bible comes from the Greek word biblion, which means book. So the Bible literally means the book, and all of the contents of the book are supposed to be inspired, meaning that they are supposed to be actually spoken by God. It is divine inspiration, and whatever is written in the Bible is something that is supposed to be like God breathed. Now, this is, of course, something that you may be familiar with other religious texts also. And we were also saying that these things were actually not written by some author. So, for the book of Job, we do not have an author assigned, right? We understand it as a part of the Bible, but we do not know who wrote this, and it is all anonymous. So, in fact, the entire Bible, we can say that it is a part of divine inspiration. Now, you may also be familiar with, these terms, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Right, so the Old Testament, which belongs to the Jews, and the New Testament, which belongs to the Christians, are both a part of the Bible. So the Bible is divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what does the word testament mean? The word testament means a mutual understanding between God and his people. Right. So if you actually understand that word, right, that the Old Testament is talking about a contract or a mutual understanding between, God and his people. And similarly, again, the New Testament is doing so. So the entire context becomes more clearer to us in terms of we understand that from the Bible, us humans have to draw uh, inspiration. Be uh, they have to be guided, right? So all of that is a part of the Bible itself. Now, the inspired literature, so we said that all the literature that we see in the Bible is inspired, meaning that it is something that God himself says, and it is found in the Old Testament. So the literature of the Jews is found in the Old Testament, and the New Testament records the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and the acts and epistles of earliest apostles. Right? So you would all be familiar with the figure of Jesus Christ. Right? So Jesus Christ is supposed to initiate the strain of Christianity. Now, for the Christians, they refer to the New Testament, while the Jews refer to the Old Testament. So, of course, the New Testament is something that comes up later, and when we have the organized religion, when we have, you know, a further development of organization of religion, institutionalization of religion. Then we see that Christianity comes up. Then we see that the New Testament comes up. Up until the Old Testament, it is not really organized religion that we're talking about. Now, what do I mean by organized religion? I mean that, institutions are built up, a whole setup is created, it is all done in a proper systematic way. So until then, of course, you have sages, even in the Jews, even for the Jews, right, in the Old Testament, you have sages, you have, people who are talking about, the teachings of God, right? So the concept of God exists, but it is not really in terms of organized, organized religion, institutionalized religion, wherein probably churches are created or, some priests are assigned some specific jobs. It does not work in that sort of a institutionalized, systematic manner, so to say. Now, the New Testament, of course, we said that it contains the teachings of Jesus Christ. And in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament, there is the promise that God would send to his people a deliverer or Messiah. Christianity teaches us that these promises were fulfilled in the life and death of the Jesus of Nazareth, right? So you know that Jesus is supposed to be the Son of God, right? So God the Father, and in Christianity you have God the Father and his Son is Jesus Christ, Christ who comes to redeem humanity from sin. Right now, the idea is familiar to all of us, right? Some of us may also understand or be familiar with the life of Christ also. But then in the Old Testament, there is a promise of a Messiah who will come up and save humanity. Now the Christians say that that promise was fulfilled in the New Testament through the figure of Jesus Christ. We understand that Jesus Christ martyred himself for redeeming humanity. Now, the Old Testament contains 39 books and the New Testament 27 books, right? So this, you understand that the Bible in that sense is a voluminous text. The Old Testament would have 39 books and the New Testament contains 27 books. Now, almost every phase of life and thought is dealt with in its pages, in its variety of literary form. So we are looking at the Bible as as literature, right? As literature students, we're looking at the Bible as literature, not really as a religious text. So you understand that the significance of the Bible as literature would then also contain the fact that it has a variety of literary forms which are a part of it. And specifically when we talk about the book of Job, we'll see that it is also a combination of various literary forms. You have poetry, you have prose, you have sort of a dramatic monologues, soliloquies, you have, there are multiple forms that exist there. So you have speech, we'll be coming to that, we'll come to the form of the book of Job also, but talking about the entire Bible itself. Now, as we said, the book of Job is a part of the Bible and it is situated in the Old Testament. So the book of Job is something that is talked about in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament belongs to the Jews. So we are not looking at that period of Christ and Christianity per se. Now, so the Bible contains a lot of literary forms, meaning poems, biographies, histories, prophecies, stories, letters, speeches, prayers, hymns, and sermons, right? So all of this is a part of the Bible, which makes, in fact, Bible an interesting reading from the point of view of literature as well. Now, let us look at an overview of the book of Job, which is prescribed for us here. So, the book of Job is the oldest of books in the Old Testament, and it occurs, or it is placed in the middle of the Old Testament, right? So it occurs in the center or the middle of the um, Old Testament. And as we said, that the author is not assigned, so we have an anonymous author. Now, when we are talking about, the anonymous author, there are multiple debates again in terms of the fact that some people believe that it is, again, as we were talking about the Iliad, some people believe that it is, one person who's written it. Some believe that, there are multiple people who had written it, and then, interpolations have occurred. Interpolations meaning later additions, interventions in the original have occurred later. Now, you must be wondering that just a moment ago I said, you know, that it is all inspired literature and it is God's breath. It is not written, so to say. But of course, we understand that that is the religious point of view. When we see, when we're looking at, the book in terms of literature, of course, as it comes down to us, as it comes to us in the form of a book itself, we are supposed to probably also understand the on the basis of the variety that exists, right, in the book of Job also, on the basis of the patterns that we see, literary patterns, and the forms, literary forms that we see that are all there in the book of Job itself, we can understand this is a part of, that this is a part of literature, and therefore it may be wondered at by literature students whether it has one author, whether it has multiple authors. So there are a number of debates regarding it. But of course, this is certain that there is no name that is given to us. Now, the book of Job, so Job is not the author of the book. He is the central character in the book. So the book is named after its central character, who is a wealthy chieftain of Uz. So this place, Uz or Uz, as you might want to call it, is a place which is, near Arabia. That is the only reference that we can get, right? So this book is, of course, something written very, very long ago. Therefore, we have no dates. It is very difficult to ascribe a date to the book of Job, to ascribe a time period, to also understand what exactly was the location wherein this person existed, or whether it is a historical figure. Job is a historical figure, or is this something that is, just um, a sort of a literary creation, right? So we do not know about all of those for certain, but we understand some people have argued that there is actually a character or a historical figure like Job, but of course there may be creative the creative sort of imagination of Job also. So he belongs to the days before priesthood and organized religion, right? So the book of Job, as we said, is before the days of priesthood and organized religion. And he, the character that we're talking about, Job, is noted as a God-fearing and upright man who is blameless and who shunned evil, right? So we understand, of course, this uh, opposition between God and evil, and you might also be familiar with the figure of Satan in uh, in the Bible, right? So you see that God symbolizes goodness, while Satan symbolizes whatever is evil or whatever is bad. So in the book of Job, you have the prologue. We'll be talking about the structure of the book as well, but just to, give you a little glimpse, then you have the prologue, wherein you see that a pact occurs between, a kind of an challenge was posed by Satan to God regarding the fact that, that people, whoever worship God, anybody who is worshipping God, would worship them because of the kind of gifts that God provided them with, or the kind of prosperity that God gave them. Uh, uh, Now, when you see that if God takes away those gifts, if God actually goes on to punish people, or take away those gifts, have misfortune upon them, then people would curse God, right? And of course, cursing God or not believing in God is something that is irreligious, right? So that would also symbolize the victory of Satan. And you understand that Satan is always a challenge to God, or he's always trying to pose a challenge to God. So this is what happens in the prologue, that you see that Satan says that he wants to, that this is the case, and the moment God does bad to people, then they'll question him, then they'll curse him. So what happens is that, to test whether his righteousness, which is Job's righteousness, and faith in God. So we said that Job is a God-fearing and upright man who believes in God, who shuns evil, who's blameless, who has absolutely an untarnished character. So to test his righteousness and also his faith in God, uh, whether it remains strong in suffering as it does in prosperity. So up until now, we said that Job is a wealthy chieftain. He has everything, a family, a good family. Then he's well respected. He's also very wealthy, so he has everything, right? So he's been good to people. He's been good as a person. So up until now, his faith in God has been uh, completely absolute in that sense. So now Satan is trying to pose that challenge, that when Job will suffer, he will not have this absolute faith in God. He will come to curse the name of God. And God says that, he is my most faithful servant, right? So God uses the term my servant for for Job time and again, and allows Satan to actually inflict upon Job a variety of misfortunes and afflictions, so to see whether his righteousness and his faith in God will prevail in suffering as it does in prosperity. Now, when Job suffers, his friends come up. So we have three friends plus one another friend who comes in later. So these are the four people that come to Job, who to comfort him. As they tussle with the problem of Job's suffering, they accused him rather than consoled him. So they've come to comfort him, but you see that they'll accuse Job of sin, of committing sin. That whatever he's suffering because he has sinned, right? And God punishes sins. Therefore, um, Job probably does not realize he has some hidden sin which he has not talked about, right? And that therefore, he's suffering because God punishes anybody who has committed sin. But Job refuses to believe, and he says that he is absolutely innocent. He has not committed any sin. Now, this challenge that Satan has posed to God, and God agreeing that Satan can choose to inflict upon Job a variety of miseries. This is something that the neither the friends nor Job himself knows about, right? So of course they are giving their own reasons, or they are trying to actually understand why Job is suffering. So his friends are of the opinion that Job is suffering because he had done some sin, and because of that sin, since God punishes anybody who has committed sin, therefore Job is suffering. But Job, he understands himself to be this upright character, and you also know that he is the upright character. Nothing has happened. He has never, his faith in God has never wavered, right? So he says that he has absolutely been innocent and his suffering is not a result of his sin. We as readers then, because we've been already told in the prologue of the book that Job is suffering because of this challenge that Satan has posed to God, right? So this is something that is unknown, but we understand that Job is innocent, unlike what his friends are levying charges on him, right? So all the accusations made by the friends is something that the readers know, do not hold, and Job also affirms his innocence. But the other characters, be it Job's wife or be it the four friends that we're talking about, all of them do not know this, right? So this is the entire sort of irony that comes up, that the readers know what is happening, right? But the characters do not know. So Job cries out to God for some other explanation because he knows that he is innocent and he's not suffering because of sin, unlike what his friends are saying. Therefore, he makes his case again, makes his case in the court of God, so to say. So to uh, so to understand, whether there is something else involved. So filled with pain and doubt, as Job is, he still has not lost his faith in God, but he questions God. He actually complains about his suffering. All of that happens, but he does not lose his faith in God, and this is what the result of the test also is, right? No matter whatever sufferings and misfortunes are afflicted on him, he retains his faith in God. So he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. And at last, we see that God intervenes, speaking out of a whirlwind. He does not answer Job's questions, but seeing God, Job is satisfied. So, towards the end of the book, we see that God comes up, after the four friends have spoken, God comes up and directly speaks to Job, right? And Job had been asking a lot of questions from God, but God does not answer a lot of his questions. And finally, Job understands the sovereignty or the magnificence of God. And finally, seeing God, he's satisfied. So he's not looking for the answers anymore. He's just satisfied. Towards the end of the book of Job, we see that he's satisfied, and when once he realizes the sovereignty of God and sees him. So we understand now that if the friends' theology, their perspectives about religion were narrow and rigid in terms of them believing that, only God punishes only those, who commit sins, that has been a very narrow viewpoint against what Job was experiencing, right? So Job knew that he was innocent and he was still suffering. So the friends' theology or their perspectives about religion then was very narrow and very rigid, right? They do not understand that God works in mysterious ways, so to say. So his concept of God had been too limited. Similarly, for Job, then, um, he was also looking for explanations, and we'll come to this fact how, his concept of God has been limited. He's not paying attention to a lot of facts that God's speech makes him realize. So finally, Job bows in submission, acknowledges the sovereignty of God in his life, realizing that the great mysteries of life are beyond man's understanding. And finally, you see that all the wealth and health and everything that Job has lost as a result of, this challenge is restored to him by God. So the book subject, which is unjust human suffering, and the universal mystery of misery, which is unmerited, which is not deserved by the character, which is not deserved by the man, makes it an appealing book. So the theme of the book, in terms of, that humans suffer unjustly, they suffer for no reason. That is something that makes the book of Job a very appealing book. Right, so this is a basic overview of the book of Job, and now we are looking at the structure of the book of Job. So in terms of the structure of the book of Job, you see that in the Bible what you have are chapters, right? So we have books, and within the books we also have the chapters. So in the chapters you will have sentences, and those sentences are called as verses, right? So you have 2 to 3 lines of sentences, and these are called as verses. So the first part, as you are seeing here, the first part would be the chapter, and then you have the colon, and after that you have the verse number. So this is how it is given. So now what happens is, now Job, in the book of Job, you see that, so you understand that these are the chapter numbers that are given. Which chapter is focusing on what? So first of all, we have the dilemma of Job, right? Wherein wherein we are talking about the controversy between God and Satan. Then there is the debates of Job, right? Beginning from chapter 3 until probably chapter 32, right? We have these debates. So there is first cycle of debate, second cycle of debate, third cycle of debate, in which you have the friend speaking and Job replying, right? So it happens for a long time in the book. And then you have the fourth friend, who is Elihu, who comes up. Now after that you have God's speeches, and finally you have the epilogue, right? So there is the conflict in terms of the structure of the literary structure of the book, or the kind of conflict resolution that happens. You have first of all the conflict that is exposed to us, the exposition of the conflict in terms of introducing what is happening. Then you have various intellectual debates that happen between Job and his friends, and finally you have repentance, right? So this is repentance by Job. He repents that he had not understood that God is the all sovereign power, and his concept of God had been limited. So this first part is given in prose. Then you have the debates happening in poetry, and finally you have again prose, that is in which you talk about the controversy of God with Job. So as we said, that the location is in the land of Uz, where Job resides, and it is somewhere near North Arabia. Now the time period that we are kind of looking at, it may be around 2000 BC, right? So you can understand we are now in 2021 AD, right? So it is 2000 BC that we are kind of looking at. So now let us look at a sort of a detailed structure of the book. So in the prologue we have the dilemma of Job in prose, chapters 1 and 2, wherein we have what is given in the prologue. We are talking about how Job is like, then the calamities of what befalls Job, what happens to Job after Satan actually inflicts all of those miseries on Job. Then Job's comforters, who are his friends or who are his comforters, counselors, you would find these words being used for the friends, right? Either friends or comforters, because they've come to comfort Job, or counselors, right? So those may be the words that may be used for Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. right? So these are the three friends, these are the three comforters, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Then you have the dialogue, which is written in poetry, right? So prologue is in prose, then you have dialogues, which is in poetry. Now, when the three friends come, you see that first of all, before they speak to Job, Job, uh, Job laments about his condition. He complains about his condition, and there are these three things that he says. Firstly, he says that he should not have been born. Secondly, he wished that he died at birth. And thirdly, he wished that he could die at that moment, right? So God has been, he is facing such a severe condition of disease and affliction and losses that he feels that he should have died then. Now, in the first cycle of speeches, we said there are three cycles of speeches. So in the first cycle of speeches, which happens from chapter 4 to 14, you see Eliphaz, who's the first friend. His first speech comes, then Job replies to him. Then you have the second friend, Bildad, who's speaking, and Job replies to Bildad. Then you have Zophar speaking, and Job's first reply to Zophar. In the second cycle of speeches, again, the same structure you see, right? And let me highlight some of the important chapters. So chapter 19 is a very important chapter wherein Job makes a lot of important observations and arguments, right? So it follows the same structure. Now, in the third uh, cycle of speeches, which happens from chapter 22 to 31, you have Eliphaz's third speech, Job's reply to Eliphaz, Bildad's speech, and Job's reply to Bildad. Now, Zophar does not speak in the third cycle of speeches. Therefore, there is no Zophar speech in the third cycle of speeches. In both first and second cycle, Zophar speaks and Job replies. But in the third cycle, you do not have Zophar's speech and Job's reply to Zophar. Instead, you have Elihu's, who's the fourth friend who has come. His four speeches come up, right? So instead of Zophar, in the third cycle of speeches, we have Elihu's four speeches. Now, after that, after the four friends have spoken, as we said, now Job also does not reply to Elihu. After Elihu speaks, you see immediately that God intervenes, right? God comes up, and Elihu's speech is supposed to make way for what God is about to say in his speech. So God's confrontation comes up after Elihu's speech, and you have God's first speech, to which Job replies, and then God's second speech, to which again Job replies. Right, so again here the important chapter is kind of chapter 42, which is the climactic chapter also. Right, so chapter 28, of course, guys, which comes up in, Job's reply to Bildad again, is also very significant, right? So Job's third reply to Bildad, chapter 28, is where you see a lot of talk about wisdom, right? So I'm just giving out those important chapters to you so that you're paying attention, or you can quickly notice when we talk about them. Right, so epilogue, then you, after all this finishes, you have the epilogue. Now, what is the prologue and what is the epilogue? As you might be familiar, prologue is like an introduction, right? And the epilogue is a conclusion. So in the epilogue, you have God also does not only speak to Job, he is angry also at Job's friends for not understanding or for challenging God's justice, right? So he also speaks to them, God and Job's friends. And then finally we have Job's restoration. So once Job passes the test and Satan is defeated, God actually restores the health and happiness of Job. So that is what we see finally in the epilogue, right? So this is the kind of structure that the book follows. Now we'll be moving on now to every sort of important chapter, discussing sort of important things within all of these chapters. Of course, since we have only one class today, to finish the book of Job. I do not think we can, do a lot in that time, but I'll try my best to complete as much as we can, right? So now I hope you have been able to understand what is happening in the book, right? How is it divided? What is up here? So now I'll be moving a slightly more quickly so that we are able to complete our thing, right? So in the prologue, which is in chapters 1 and 2, we already spoke that we had Job's spiritual characters being talked about, his family and possessions, right? So we understand that, all of this is talked about at a very rapid pace. Now, this sets the mood, this sets the tensions that, what is going to happen is then which what the dialogue say and what happens next is at a slow pace. So the introduction comes up in a very fast pace. All of this, Job's character, his family possessions, Satan's his accusations and attacks on Job, and Job's reaction and the arrival of his friends, all of this is talked about in a very brief time. Now, the prologue is necessary background in a rapid narrative style. So it highlights the tension. It also tells the reader, what is going to happen in the book. So four statements summarize Job's qualities as a man in the eyes of God. Now, Job is somebody that God himself says is his most faithful servant, right? So it is God himself who gives the name of Job to Satan to test him, right? But of course, he does not do it himself. Satan is the one who comes up and who says that, I want to challenge somebody. So now God sees Job as the perfect embodiment of one of his servants. So you see that he is understood by God to be blameless, meaning one who walks in close fellowship with God, right? So he abides by whatever God tells him, therefore, he is blameless, he is untarnished in his character. Then upright, meaning straight, in the sense of not deviating from God's standards. So Job has never deviated from what God has prescribed him. He has been obedient to God. He has always followed the standards of God. Then he is also a God-fearing man, meaning that he is aware of God. He reveres him, he adores him, he has respect for him, and he's submissive to God's majesty. Right? So he's obedient and he has respect and he's aware of God. That is what we mean by fearing God, right? Not like a terror of God, but in terms of being, faithful, being obedient, being submissive to God's majesty. And finally, we have God thinking of Job as somebody who turned away from evil and also shunned it. Right? So he is dismissive of evil. Uh, he does no evil deeds, right? So he makes the perfect candidate now for testing the piety. Now God richly blessed his faithful servant Job. The author uses the numbers 3, 7 and 10, all symbolic of completeness, to demonstrate that Job's wealth was astonishing. Now, you will see a long description of, how many cattle does Job have, how many children he has. He has 10 children, right? And then what kind of a wealth he has. All of these are given in these sort of complete or lucky numbers as per the Bible, 3, 7, and 10. So when you read those passages, it becomes very, very clear that Job had all the kind of wealth. So Job is a man who is both wealthy and godly, right? Which is something exceptional or rare to find, right? So in a lot of books and in a lot of, how we understand literature, we see or life, the world itself, So we see that people who do not have a lot of resources to themselves are generally understood to be the simpler ones. They're understood to be, more righteous in their approach. But the wealthy people are always looked at with some sort of doubt and suspicion that they'll be manipulative, they'll be calculative, they'll be doing something wrong in order to amass that kind of wealth. But what distinguishes Job and distinguishes this character is that he's both wealthy and he is godly. Right? Godly meaning that he is very, very good. He abides by God and his principles. Therefore, you see that this is an exceptional character that we're talking about. Now, how do we know that Job's character is godly? It is seen in his concern for the spiritual welfare of his grown-up children. After each year's round of birthday parties given by each of his 7 sons, Job would offer burnt offerings for forgiveness of any sins committed by them unknowingly or otherwise. So Job, also kind of repents for his children's sins. If they have committed any sins without their knowledge or with their knowledge, then Job is somebody who will make an offering to God so that God can um, forgive his children. In every way, Job was capable and exemplary in his ability to amass wealth, in his concern for his family, in his godly piety before God. Right? So, in every sense of the word, Job is the perfect character. He's wealthy, he is very, very capable, he's very able, he has extreme concern, he also cares about his family, and he's also very, very uh, pious, very godly, a devout follower of God. So Job's calamities is also a part of the prologue. So one day the sons of God, which are the angels, presented themselves before God to report on their activities. Satan also came and reported that he was roaming and walking on the earth, apparently looking for those whom he could accuse and trouble. Right? So Satan is on the lookout for troubling somebody. Of course, Satan is the evil creature, so he's always creating some mischief, and you see that he's on the lookout to trouble somebody. Now, knowing Satan's searching, of course, God knows whatever is going on. So, knowing that Satan is searching for somebody, the Lord mentioned Job as a supreme example of piety. Now, Satan's response attacked Job's motives. That God is saying that, Job is the perfect embodiment of piety. Now, Satan retorts. Satan says no, and he says that, he challenges God, saying that Job's piety and goodness is not without reason, and that it springs out of a selfish motive. That whatever Job does, whatever good deeds or whatever goodness that he has, is actually out of a selfish motive. He prays to God, he worships God because God provides him with everything. Because God had blessed him abundantly and protected him from all harm, he remains faithful to him. Right? So that is Satan's challenge. That is what he's arguing, that since God gives him everything, since God is so nice to him, therefore he's also nice to God, right? He believes in God. Now, he says that if Yahweh, now God is also addressed in this by this word Yahweh in the Old Testament. So if God would stretch out his hand and strike all that Job had, he would then surely curse God to his face. So Satan is basically saying, that um, God lends out these gifts, and these, it is like a bribe that God offers to for praising him, that he gives everything to people. And the moment he snatches things, then people will be very angry, and they'll stop believing in God. They'll be, they'll curse him. So the entire premise of piety and belief and faith in God is being challenged by Satan. And he says that it is not because of his belief in God, but because of his own self-serving, selfish reasons, that Job is faithful, is loyal to God, and that would be revealed the moment God snatches away every thing or anything that is prosperous, is good for Job. So now God is absolutely confident of his servant Job, therefore he accepts Satan's challenge. But why does he need to test him to find out his motives? Of course, God would know whether Job's piety is actually something, uh, is there is actually something um true or not, it is authentic or genuine or not. But he still chooses to test him, right? To find out his motive, to find out whether he has a selfish motive in doing so, or whether he genuinely believes and praises God, right? So now the charges that Satan is levying on God is something that is challenging not only the reputation of Job, so to say, but also challenging the entire premise of faith in God. Therefore, the charges are very, very serious, and God has to do this to actually, you know, make people realize, make Satan realize that he's wrong, right? So, this is why he tests Job. Now, God knows of Job's selfless worship, but he used Job as a demonstration to silence Satan. Right? If God had not conducted this test on Job, then Satan would say that Satan would always have an upper hand, right? And he would always taunt God about it. But when Job emerges successful in his test, he passed that test, Satan would be silenced forever, right? That nothing can actually, all the accusations that he's making are completely false. In addition, he perhaps wanted to deepen Job's spiritual insight, right? So there is another argument that is made that God is also teaching his servants, his followers, right? So this test is conducted sometimes to teach something as well. So this to widen Job's concept of God, to actually deepen his spiritual insight also, God may be conducting this test on Job. Now, Job's tragic misfortune, Satan lost no time in his assault on Job. So, Satan is now attacking Job. First of all, we have the Sabian attack, wherein all his cattle is killed. He faces financial losses, right? Now, you have the fire of God, which fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and servants, right? So his then you have the Chaldean raid, and finally you have the great wilderness wind. So in 4 attacks, actually Satan has snatched away everything from Job, be it his property, be it his wealth, right? All of that is snatched away. Now, Job, in reaction to this first assault, right? So this is the first assault, wherein Satan snatches away all of Job's property and also kills his children. So Job grieves deeply. He is deeply saddened by it. And he tore his robe, shaved his head, depicting the loss of personal glory. Right? So, from a wealthy man, he has turned into a poor guy who has lost everything that he had. But even after this, he is worshipping God, thinking that whatever he had, whatever wealth, riches, everything that he had, was something that was God's blessing, right? So God had the right to claim it whenever he wanted to. So he does not lose his faith in God, and therefore Satan loses in the first test. But Satan did not give up this challenge. He goes again to God and says that Job was still worshipping God because God has preserved his body, right? So probably the loss of property and all, people uh, can still tolerate, but when it comes to their own health, when it comes to their own body, if God would, challenge uh, Job there, uh, then Job would not pass the test. That is now Satan's accusation. So the first test involved Job's wealth, and the second one involved his health. So Job's affliction, which caused painful ulcerous sores. So God agrees to this challenge as well. He says that Satan should not take the life of Job, right? As long as he does not take the life of Job, he can afflict him with any kind of diseases. And we see that Job is terribly diseased, right? And as a result of his diseases, he can no longer stay in his house, and he goes on to live to live outside the city. So he's alienated now from his family. He's alienated from the place. And once a wealthy chieftain, he is now residing with beggars. So he is actually in a place where there is garbage, where there is ashes, right? And he is severely afflicted. He is severely diseased. So the after effect of the second assault may be said to be three happenings: Job's separation from the city, temptation by his wife, and his submission to God. Right, so these are the three repercussions of what happens. Now Job's wife enters the scene for the only time. So we have, how many characters, if you can really count, how many characters are there? We have Job, we have his four friends, um, Eliphaz, then you have Bildad, Zophar, Elihu, and finally you have Job's wife. Other two characters that we may think of are God and Satan, right? So these are all the characters that we find in the book. Now Job's wife is the character who comes for the smallest time. So she enters the scene for the only time. She could not understand Job's silent acceptance of his bodily affliction. So Job is suffering seriously, and in her care and love for Job, she says that do you still hold fast to your integrity? So she urges Job to forget his integrity, curse God, and die. In response, Job called her foolish, that she is spiritually ignorant, she does not understand God, and she does not discern, she cannot judge what is right, what is wrong. So Job does not kind of listen to her. Her suggestion that he curse God was exactly what Satan had twice said Job would do, right? So that the entire test, the entire challenge is about that Job would curse God, right, when he faces affliction. So if he did that just at this point, then he would not pass the test. So at the moment when he needed the comfort from her the most, now Job, another thing that we notice is that Job in this situation is completely helpless also, not only bodily but also nobody supporting him, right? All people that he could rely on, his wife, his friends, nobody understands him, nobody is supporting him. So we also see that at this time when Job is expecting comfort from his wife, he understands, he receives this terrible blow as a religious man, that his wife is bitter towards God. His wife's appeal was more trying to Job than the losses themselves, for she spoke out of the strong emotional marital bond between them. Right? So Job is actually now more aghast, he suffers more because of what his wife says to him. Now there is another interpretation to what um, you know what Job's wife says. So she says, bless him and die. Now this is one interpretation that you have found in your study material, right? That what we've talked about, that Job is asking Job's wife is asking Job to curse God and die, right? Rather than facing all of these miseries. But on the other hand, you have other people, other critics. One of these critics is called Alan Cooper, and in this essay, which is The Sense of the Book of Job, he says, bless and die could be interpreted otherwise also to mean that Job should accept his fate and die, which he himself says continually, right? So we will see that now Job, when he makes his dialogues with his friends, he would constantly talk about his wish to die, right? So at this point, he had actually called his wife a fool because she is asking him to curse God and die. But in a sense, he will be doing that when he will question God and when he will constantly ask for death. So note here that Job's willingness to receive blessings as well as adversity from God without complaints show that he did not serve God for personal gain. Right? So Job is both willing to accept something that is that whatever is bad, whatever is good, as long as it is coming from God, Job is willing to accept it, right? There initially, that is what we see. Of course, he will question it, right? In that sense, he will ask why is it happening to him, but his faith will not waver, right? So he will raise constant questions, he will make these complaints, but his faith will not waver. Now you have the three comforters or three friends who come up, and on learning of Job's affliction, his three beloved friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, came from each of their own place. So these are the three sages. Now Job also is like a sage, right? So in that world, that the time that we are talking about, these were the most famous and the most erudite, the most successful of sages, right? Or the place that we are talking about, it had the most um, it has the best of sages, right? So you have these three people representing those sages. So their purpose was to sympathize with God, with Job, and comfort him. A fourth friend, who is Elihu, was present, though he is not mentioned until later, right? So chapter 32, we find Elihu comes up, and some people have argued that since he was not mentioned earlier, therefore it may be a later addition, that he does not appear in the original book of Job, but he was added later. So the prologue implies at the start that the friends were wrong in their view that Job's suffering was a result of his sin. As we said, that we know for sure that Job has not committed any sins, as we know that whatever he is suffering is because of the challenge that Satan has posed to God, rather than out of some sin that Job himself has committed, as his friends are saying. So Job speaks first. Friends are shocked to see his condition, they grieve him, and they let Job speak. So Job's first lament, his curse, comes up. Now, silence of Job's friends was broken when words gushed forth from the agitated soul of Job. The words he spoke were in shocking contrast to his former expression of calm submission. So, until now, Job had been very, very calm. He was submitting to God, but now, facing his situation, he is absolutely frustrated. So, Job laments his misery when he says he wished he had not been born. Right? So, this is what we've talked about. First of all, he wishes that he would not have been born, but that could only happen if the date of his birthday did not exist. Right? Secondly, he wishes that he died at birth, right? He was a stillborn baby and he was dead at birth. And the third time, he wishes that he could die at that moment. But it is also important to note that he does not contemplate suicide, right? He asks God to kill him, not really he makes any attempt to kill him himself, right? So he says that death is like a treasure. So these passages are very, very gloomy, right? Wherein he is talking about death continuously, he's wishing for death continuously, right? So all of this is coming from his pain rather than this sin of not believing in God, So he's constantly asking God to take away his life, to end his misery, right? Rather than thinking that there is no God because he's suffering, right? So that is the difference that we see. So in this lament, in this complaint also, he is constantly believing in God. Only whatever his cries are because of the fact that he's suffering, nothing else really. So in the dialogue, we said, the first speeches begin. So first of all, you have Eliphaz's rebuke of Job. So he praises Job. Eliphaz first of all praises Job for helping many and being righteous, but also rebukes him, saying that Job had been a great encourager to everybody else, but he could not encourage himself. Now, when Job had been encouraging everybody else when they faced suffering, but now when he is suffering, his friend says that he cannot encourage himself. But of course, he fails to realize that when people are suffering, it becomes very difficult for them to actually encourage themselves. That is why the friends had come to him, right? That since he is suffering, they had come to sympathize with him, they had come to comfort him. But instead, they are, making all sorts of allegations and accusations against him. Now, the doctrine of retribution or his reasoning about suffering. Now, what do we mean by this doctrine of retribution? We mean by the doctrine of retribution that anybody who commits any sin is punished by God. So all suffering comes from committing some sort of sin. So Eliphaz made a classic statement on the theory of suffering. The innocent do not perish, the upright are not destroyed, but the person who does iniquity and sows trouble will be punished, and the wicked perish under God's anger. So Job was a sinner and hence he was suffering. This is what Eliphaz would say. And he supports his argument with, he says he had seen this in a dream. So to add to the authority uh, of his viewpoint, he says that he had also seen this in a dream. Now dreams were supposed to be, you know, an a hint or a clue from God. Therefore, if he had seen this in a dream that Job was suffering because he had committed a sin, therefore, what he was saying was true. That is what Eliphaz was trying to project. So it is questioned whether the words he had heard in his dream were a revelation from God or not. Right? So we do not know whether this dream that Eliphaz sees is actually a revelation from God or not, but he tries to add authority to his claims by saying that he had also seen this, dream. Now he makes his recommendation, his suggestion to Job. So he believes in the in the cause and effect view of sin. That if you commit a sin, you suffer, right? So this is the cause, committing sin, and the effect is suffering. So Eliphaz now advises Job to appeal to God because God is majestic, powerful, benevolent, and although the advice was not wrong in itself, Eliphaz was wrong in basing his advice on the assumption that Job has sinned deliberately. Even so, Job did seek to present his cause to God. Right? So Job is terribly disappointed in his friends that they are believing that his suffering arises out of committing a sin. Therefore, they are asking him to repent. They are asking him to ask for God's forgiveness, right? But all of this is a wrong assumption. So his reminder of God's blessing. Now Eliphaz also reminded Job that if he would acknowledge his guilt, God would bless him, right? So if all of the friends are not believing at all that Job is suffering for no reason at all, they all believe that he is suffering because he had committed a sin. Therefore, if he would repent, he would ask for forgiveness, then God would bless him. So Eliphaz's speech may be summarized as follows: that his suffering is a result of his sin. Man has no chance before God of being pure. Man is mortal. trouble is not accidental but retributive or disciplinary, then God is also a transcendental figure that, his ways are beyond um, humans, and then submitting to God's ways will bring blessings. That if you repent, if you ask for forgiveness, then God would surely bless you. This is the kind of speech that Eliphaz, who's the first friend who speaks for the first time, makes. Now, Job, in his reply to Eliphaz, says he's not only replying to Eliphaz, he's also replying to the other characters. He says that he is suffering not because of any of his sins, but he's suffering nonetheless. So, in these first 7 verses, Job expressed his reason for complaining. He complained because his grief had been heavy, right? So, he says he wouldn't have complained if, it was a lighter grief, but since his grief was very heavy, he had been complaining. Job feels that his friends have disappointed him by not showing kindness in his state of despair. Now, Job also pleads to his 3 counselors, saying that uh, they are constantly accusing him of committing some sin. So, what is the sin that that Job has committed, because of which he is suffering, right? So, if there is any sin that his friends think that Job has committed and due to which he is suffering, then they should tell Job about them, about those sins. Tell him where he has gone wrong. Now, Job also describes the pattern of his misery. So he says another bitter complaint of his miserable condition. He says that man's existence is servitude, right? So man is a slave to God, in which he is subject to continual toil and misery. So like servants always suffer, similarly, man has to always work and suffer. And in that work, in that suffering, in that constant drudgery, what man hopes for is some slight respite. So he finally makes a prayer to God in his reply, saying that, first he speaks of the brevity of life, that human life is very short, and death to Job at this moment would be a release from the haunting eyes of God. So he believes that God is angry with him for some reason or the other, and he wanted death, he wished for death at this moment so that he is released out of all his troubles. Now, Bildad's first speech. In Bildad's first speech, we see that he is again thinking of, that Job has committed a sin, which is why uh, he is suffering. So he pointed out to Job that there was the possibility of restoration of prosperity and happiness if he would acknowledge his iniquities or sins, right? So it is in the same vein as Eliphaz has spoken, but Eliphaz was polite in his first speech. On the other hand, Bildad is abrupt. So Job's words, in which he sought to justify his complaints, according to him, were nothing but a big wind, blowing wildly, noisily, rashly, and purposelessly with damaging results. So actually, Bildad is also saying that, whatever Job's complaints are now, he is um, not doing something right. So he says Job's children were also destroyed because they sinned against God, and Job's punishment was what he deserved for his hidden sin. So he also said that God would restore his righteous estate if Job would seek God, implore the compassion of the Almighty, and be true and upright. Right. So if he corrected himself, if he pleaded to God, if he asked for the compassion and the kindness of God, then he'll be restored. Now, he chooses some illustrations from nature, the fate of the papyrus tree, the frailty of spider's web, and the ability of a garden plant to grow despite great obstacles as wonders of nature, as wonders of God's creation. So the first 2 pictures, which is the papyrus and the spider's web, shows that the godless perish, right? So the papyrus and the spider's web, because they are frail, because they are, they are godless, they are fragile and they perish, they die. But the last one, which is the garden plant, shows that it is symbolic of, it is taken as a metaphor of that, uh, despite all the difficulties the garden plant faces, it prospers because it is righteous. Now, note that although Bildad offers a measure of hope to Job in his speech, it missed the mark. It failed to bring comfort and to evince the confession of sin. So Bildad is also not able to comfort Job, and you see that uh, he again asks Job that he had committed some hidden sin because of which he is suffering, and it does not bring any comfort to Job. Now, Bildad, as we said, that Eliphaz had used divine authority in terms of dream to support his argument. Bildad uses tradition and history. He says that our forefathers know a lot, right? So, and we know nothing. So you should believe in what our forefathers had said about religion, about God and suffering and sin. So he cites that as his argument, saying that this is why he is suffering. But in Job's experience, it does not make sense. Job knows that he has committed no wrong, and even then he is suffering. Therefore, Bildad's, allusion to authority, to tradition, to say and support his argument is something that does not um, is not really helpful to Job. So Bildad's use of illustrations from the present were in conflict with Job's righteous state, and Bildad's prospect of relief in the future. So Bildad is saying, if you will repent, if you will correct yourself, then finally in the future you will be restored back to your original prosperity. But Job needs comfort now. Job needs help now, and therefore Bildad's responses have not been very helpful to him. So Job replies to Bildad. He says that he had not forsaken God, and therefore he should not be perishing. Because God had tormented Job, an upright man, how he reasoned could any man stand righteous before God? Right? So first of all, his complaint is that Job had been completely innocent, and therefore, and even then, he has been suffering. Then why would people be righteous? Why would people be upright? Why would they be good if even when they're good, they'll face suffering? So what hope could there be before such an almighty arbitrary God, right? So he wonders that, God punishes people nonetheless, whether they are good or bad. Therefore, what could what could be the hope for man? So he then gives several reasons why it seemed useless to present his case to God. Now he says, that God. So another thing that comes up is that Job wants to present his case to God because he believes that since he is innocent, therefore God would not punish him, would acquit him of every misery that he is facing, right? So he wants to talk to God. He wants to present his case in front of the court of God. But then he also says that this kind of an argument, this kind of a thing, is not possible because it is not the human world, right? He's not really asking for it in the human world, where there are courts of law where people can present their case and be acquitted of their crimes. But he only wishes that there was somebody who would let him talk to God or act as the arbitrator so that he can present his case to God. So Job spoke all these words in protest against the friend's notion that God blesses the good man and punishes the wicked. Job's own experience as a blameless person suffering at God's hand refuted their misconception of God's justice. Then, although Job said an earlier man could not challenge God and get away with it, he now challenged God asking several questions. Right? So earlier in his first speech, in his first reply, Job was saying that man could not challenge God. But now in his questions, by way of, asking these questions, he is actually challenging the justice and the ways of God. So, by his first question, he implied that God was wrong to oppress and reject his own creation, while favoring the wicked. So, in his reply, Job says that, people who are wicked, people who are bad, are actually able to prosper, but people who are good are suffering, right? So, he is absolutely agitated and frustrated by that. So then Job reaffirmed his innocence, saying, I am indeed not guilty, and yet God continued to oppress him. After slashing out again at God for pursuing him as if he were a lion being hunted, Job expressed a desire for death. If God would only let him alone, he could be cheerful for a little while before he would die, never to return. Right? So he's saying that, you know, he is innocent and even then he's suffering, while people who commit all kinds of sins and people who are bad are led away by God, right? So this is what makes him suffer more, and he says that he wants nothing. God should offer him some respite. He should kill him, and he'll never come back again on earth. Now, after this, you have the third friend Zophar making his first speech. His speech is based in theology, again, in what was believed about uh, religion. He considered it his task to convince Job to leave off his wild statements claiming personal innocence. Right? So, Zafar also believes that Job is not innocent and he should not, he should not make these false claims. So he brings out 3 points in his speech: an accusation against Job that he's committed a sin, God's wisdom. He talks about God's wisdom, that it surpasses all. God works in mysterious ways. And he finally also talks about that Job should repent. So Zophar rebuked Job for being talkative, scoffing against God, because Job was justifying himself. So in his first and second replies, and in his lament, Job had been continuously talking about his innocence, and he's been constantly justifying himself. So Zophar says that Job should not do such a thing. He had committed a sin, although he may not know about it. Therefore, he should not be so talkative. He should not, question God in such a manner. He accused Job of being stupid as he did not understand the wisdom of God. Right? So Zophar says that the wisdom of God surpasses the wisdom of man. Therefore, Job was being stupid in order to not understand that. Now, Zophar also talks about God's inscrutable wisdom, that the ways of God is something that is beyond human comprehension. It cannot be understood, scrutinized by man. Therefore, he elaborated on that doctrine. And like Eliphaz and Bildad, Zophar assumed Job's sin and recommended that he repent. Right? So this is what happens. Now, Job's first reply to Zophar, he rebuked his friends. He cleverly attacked their supposed monopoly on wisdom by pointing out that their views were common knowledge. Right? So whatever his friends were saying, Job already knew that. Right? So they are talking about wisdom, they're talking about all these kinds of things, but they're talking about Job being stupid. But Job says, whatever they are saying is already known to Job, and he is completely blameless. And whatever they may think that they are very, very knowledgeable, very, very wise, but whatever they are saying is common knowledge. It is nothing new. So to challenge this, he says that whatever they were saying, their approach to justice did not really go in line with whatever Job had experienced. First, he says that he is innocent, and even then he's suffering, which makes all their claims false. Secondly, he says that he mentions the case of destroyers and God haters who prosper and are secure, right? So all the time they're saying that whoever is sinful, God will punish him, but it does not happen. That is what Job is saying. And thirdly, he noted that even animals knew that calamities came from God's hand. So, whatever Zophar is saying, that, everything is done by God. So he says, this is something that everybody knows. What are you telling me? Right? Even animals know that whatever happens, happens because of God. So, sarcastically acknowledging their alleged wisdom, Job says, truly then you are the people, and with your wisdom will die. So, since Zophar had called him stupid, so Job says that, you have a limited view, you have limited wisdom, and with you wisdom will itself die. So now Job also recounts numerous instances of the wisdom and might of God. In addition to being wise and powerful over individuals, God is also powerful over sovereign over entire nations, right? So God's power and sovereignty is not limited to individual beings like Job or Zophar or his friends, but over entire nations as well. So Job's response to Zophar's question, can you discover the depths of God, is that he cannot comprehend the infinite ways of God. So at no point Job is saying that he can understand everything about God, but Zophar and the other friends also cannot, right? So why are they claiming that they know, right? Even when they do not. So he says that only God can reveal, what are the mysterious ways of God. Only God knows, and only He can reveal. No man, like Zophar or Job, can himself discover what are God's intentions, what are God's ways. So Job then prepared to present his case to God directly. His counselors were representing him falsely. So Job would have to be his own lawyer. He has to be his own attorney, right? So his counselors were not really helping him. They were not presenting his case truly. Therefore, Job would have to be his own attorney, his own lawyer in talking to God. So Job knew that he was putting himself in a dangerous position by speaking directly to God, but he was determined to take the risk, even to the point of losing his own life. Right? So, of course, he's posing a direct challenge to God that I want to come to speak to you, right? Which is something which is very, very daring. But he's still doing that. He still says that, he knows that God can kill him as a result of his dare, of his challenge, but he says that I have hope in him. And this shows that, at no moment Job gives up on his hope of God. So if Job could argue his case with God, he said that he would be vindicated. He could dare to challenge God because of his clear conscience, right? So this is done because he knows that he is innocent. Therefore, he can directly speak to God. Now, in the second cycle of the speeches, Eliphaz, Zophar, they become very, very vindictive. They clung to their beliefs. And again, it is about, the fate of the wicked who suffer as a result of committing their sin. So I'm not really going to, detailed summary of this. You can, we have kind of talked about this. So again, uh, Eliphaz, Bildad, everybody so far, they're all saying the same thing, that that Job has committed a sin, and whatever he's saying is false, and he should not. Now they do not also present him with this option of forgiveness from God, but they are absolutely, now angry that Job is trying to defend himself. So Job says that their theology, their worldview about religion was limited, and Job's experience stated otherwise. So this is what happens in the second cycle of speeches. In the third cycle of speeches, then you have Eliphaz, who speaks for the third and last time to Job, and he's discourteous. He says that God is disinterested in whatever Job has to say, because whatever Job does is of no result or consequence to God. So he fabricated a list of crimes that are typical of wealthy man, uh, to say that Job had committed all of those crimes, committed all those crimes that the wealthy commit, and therefore Job is suffering. But this is not true, as we know. So Job had never questioned God's omniscience. He had never questioned that God knew everything. And he was questioning God's justice, that God had been unjust in what he was doing to Job, but he never questioned God's knowledge. So Job had also not questioned God's ability to judge, right? Although he's questioning his justice, but he does not question God's ability to judge. So he continued on the two problems that continue to plague him: his own injustices and injustice in the world. That his suffering was undeserved. People who were wicked were not suffering. So, but God never answers these questions. So, by calling attention to God's majesty and to the moon, man, and maggots, Bildad sought to get Job to face up to the reality of his own worthlessness. Job, of course, had no quarrel with majesty of God, but the rest of Bildad's speech was pointless because it gave no hope for vindication, which Job craved, and no hope for purification, which Job already said he did not need. Right? So Job wanted some sort of a respite from his condition, which Bildad's speech is not giving him, and then Eliphaz and Bildad's speech is not giving him. And whatever they're talking about, purification of his sins, does not apply to Job. So this chapter constitutes Job's longest speech, and it is the grand finale to all the three comforters. So he talks about God's wisdom, he talks about his glory, he talks about his, that he wants to die considering his present misery, and he talks also about that he has been innocent. So Job's rebuke of Bildad's attitude and Job's statement of God's greatness is what we see here. Now he's enlarged on the view of God by declaring that God would in time destroy the wicked. Thus Job, in sarcastic indignation, fired back at Bildad. Right? So this is what we've already discussed. Now in chapter 28, you see Job's discourse on wisdom. So he says that it is not possible for man to presume that he can discern the inscrutable mysteries of majesty God, right? Basically meaning that man cannot find out the ways of God. But the essence of wisdom is twofold. So he's talking about the common religious beliefs at that time, that wisdom says that man should fear the Lord and should depart from evil. He should shun evil. So these are the two things that wisdom would entail. So Job's rebuke to the short-sighted wisdom of his friends is an effort to demonstrate that their limited theological outlook was false. So by talking about wisdom, what is Job trying to say to his friends is that they do not understand, or their point of view on wisdom is also limited. All that wisdom resides in God and not in man. So this is what is given here in chapter 29. Job rehearsed his past virtues, that he had been good, and in the final chapters Job gives a concluding summary of his case as if he were in court. So you see he talks about his past glory, that he was a prosperous man, and present miseries are highlighted in the view of his past glories, and finally he says that he has been innocent. So he is now not petitioning with his comforters, not really talking to them, but he wants to talk to God directly. That is what we see here. So this hymn on wisdom actually prepares for God's visit and God's speech. So now Elihu's 4 speeches comes up. Elihu, who's been listening to his 3 elders, to these 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, now recommended that Job would repent of his willful sin committed prior to his calamities. Instead of, believing that Job had committed a sin, Elihu recommended that Job repent of pride. He does not say that Job had committed a sin and therefore he was suffering, but he says that since he was suffering at this point, and therefore, by challenging God, by questioning the ways of God, he is committing a sin now. It is not because of his earlier sin that Job is suffering, but it is that since he is suffering now, he is challenging ways of God, and that is a sin. So he had now an attitude of pride before God and questioning of God's ways, and that led him to suffer. So Job does not answer Elihu, and Elihu's responses again. It is a preparation for God's breakthrough. So he says that what Job is constantly trying to say, that God did not hear him, God did not listen to him, despite Job constantly trying to talk to God, God does not answer. So he says that God does not answer to such proud calls and prayers. Then he does not even answer to prayers that that are genuine and that are very, very urgent. Then why would he answer these proud statements that Job is making right now? But he says that Job is not really listening properly. God does not really come directly and speak to man. He communicates with man nonetheless in serious and mysterious ways, like in dreams and in sickness. So he says that dreams and sickness are a way. Then in sickness, people remember God, and sickness is a hint that a man is doing something wrong, and he should remember the name of God. So he talks about that. Then he also refutes Job's charge that God is unjust. Now, Job had constantly been saying that, since he had not committed any sins and he was still suffering, therefore, his suffering is unjust. So this is also something Elihu dislikes. So in his third speech, he refuted Job's charge that it is useless to serve God. So as we said, that Job has been saying that, why would people be doing good things if God punishes the good people also, and he lets the wicked people free? So this is something again that Elihu questions, saying that, that man's action does not really matter to God, right? He does good because of himself, right? It is not that God God is the overpowering transcendental force. He is the all-seeing. So man's individual actions are not really of consequence to God. It is only of consequence to man. So he commented on God's justice with man and discussed God's sovereignty over man. So his final speeches is towards the end, he's talking about the sovereignty of God. And in the final speech, he elaborated on God's justice and sovereignty. So this is a basic summary or an overview of what happens in Elihu's speech. So I've already discussed that, he speaks in disease. Now, Elihu was correct in one aspect, which is that that Job is now being too proud in talking to God, in trying to say that he wants to talk to God directly, in trying to say that that God's ways were unjust, and in trying to question the ways of God. So in second speech of Elihu, he says that God is the judge of all men, supreme, just, impartial. He said that Job added to his other sins resentment or condemning attitude and rebellion against God, right? So the kind of resentment that he's showing towards the misery that he's facing, not accepting it, and the kind of rebellion that he's displaying, that he wants to now question God's authority, God's judgment. that is something that is not right and is a sin. So Elihu says that God will not pervert justice. God is always just, and there is no, there is no moment that he makes people suffer unjustly. In his third speech, Elihu refuted Job's charge that God did not reward him for his innocence. Right? So he says that God rewarded him, and Job certainly had questioned the value of serving God, for he had suffered like the wicked. But Elihu says that God is supreme and thus it's not affected by man's innocence or sin. Um, so Job was crying because of his pride, not because of unjust suffering. So he explains further that a person's sin or his righteous living affects only man. This is something that we've already spoken about. Now, Elihu's fourth speech can be divided into two parts. In first part, he talks about God's justice and power in dealing with both the wicked and the afflicted. And second, after he's spoken about justice and power of God, he also speaks about God's sovereignty and benevolence. That God is all powerful, but also God cares about people. It is not about that God never listens to man. God listens, he cares. Job should wait for God's responses rather than, indulging in this pride and indulging in this rebellion. So God now comes up on scene and he says, so instead of answering questions, he questions Job, right? So Job had not expected God to come. He had been constantly calling out to him, but he did not expect an answer, or he only expected silence from God. But whatever questions that Job had been raising, God does not answer those questions. Right? Instead of answering questions, God asks questions. So the purpose of this confrontation, the speech is clear. Job was put in his place before God. He was shown to be ignorant and impotent in contrast to God's sovereign wisdom and power. If he could not comprehend or control God's government in nature, how could he comprehend to control Lord's ways with man? Right? So, in these instances, we would find that God talks about His creation, about nature, and He says that if if Job has not created anything, if Job does not understand the ways of nature, he cannot control nature, then how can he control God's relationship with man? So God is the Almighty, far and above humanity, but He's also near. He cares and He hears. This is what we gather out of God's confrontation or His speech with man. So the confrontation includes God's first speech, as we said, then Job's response of humility or his first reply. He becomes humble when he realizes, that God is the all sovereign, all supreme, all powerful. And then in God's second speech that he gives, finally Job repents, right? So first he's humbled, and then when God makes his second speech, Job finally repents. So in first speech, God challenged Job in his opening question itself. Who is that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? So God says that Job does not know a thing, right? He is without knowledge, and still he wants to, talk about, God's decisions. So here he derided Job for his perversion and ignorance of God's design for the universe. So only God knows, what He plans for the universe. Job is talking about, this as if he knows what is God designed for the universe. So as a friend of God, Job would have been expected to talk about, God's ways to the others, but instead Job was challenging the ways of God himself. So therefore, God, this made his charge very, very severe. And also Job's word were without knowledge. He does not have the authority, he does not have the awareness, he does not have the knowledge of God's and Satan's plan. He does not have, any awareness about God's mysterious ways, and even then he's challenging God. So God's questions, it is also symbolic of, how much these people knew, how much these sages or this author knew. So God's questions included questions on cosmology, oceanography, meteorology, astronomy, and zoology. Right. So every aspect is being talked about, which is also, in a sense, symbolic of how much did these people know who were writing this book. So some of the questions were, where was Job when God made the world? Light and darkness, wind and rain, the constellations in their course. What does Job know about the creatures of the world? Did he make them? Can he feed them, tame them as God can? Right. So in the first reference, we find the reference of the ostrich. Now, as you know, ostrich is a large bird, and he can run at a great speed. So the stupidity of the ostrich. Now, ostrich, when he's faced with trouble, he kind of uh, puts his head in the sand, right? So he hides himself. So it is the stupidity of the ostrich that is something that the Arabs talk about, and it is the lack of wisdom and understanding wherein ostrich hides their heads and necks in a bush thinking they were safe because they could see nothing, right? So this is the stupidity of the ostrich. But despite being stupid in such a way that thinking that if they hide themselves, nothing will happen to them. Um, God would have created this bird, which is inferior to the other animals in wisdom, but we know that ostriches run at a great speed. Therefore, they can still be able to save them, which means that God can save, and God cares about, all his creations. So this is something that may never be understood by man, or is not understood by Job at this point of time. God's mysterious ways in which he preserves the universe, right? So note that God's first speech, having begun with a challenge, also ended with one. He that reproved God, let him answer it. Right? So he's asking Job that does he understand the creation of the ostrich? Does he understand the creation of other animals? Right? But Job realized that he was deficient in the knowledge regarding God's ways and incompetent to control nature. Right? So he cannot control nature. Man cannot control nature. It is only God that can control nature. So he finds that whatever pride that he was displaying in himself is now shrunk, and whatever he can believe about God is expanding. His knowledge of God, his concept of God as the all-powerful, as the all-supreme, is expanding. So Job replies to this in silence, and he said that I will add no more. But at this point, Job does not repent. Therefore, God makes another speech. So in God's second speech, in his first speech, we have the reference of the ostrich. In the second speech, we have the reference of these two creatures, which is Behemoth and Leviathan. Now, Behemoth is the creature of land, all right? So Behemoth is understood as hippopotamus, and Leviathan can be vaguely understood as the crocodile. Now, so these are also sort of mythological figures. So whereas the first speech reviewed two areas of creation, the inanimate and the animate, the second oration presented two animals of creation, which is the behemoth and the leviathan. Right? So these are two creatures that God talks about in his second speech to Job. So God, in piercing irony, challenged Job to imagine himself in control of the universe, to play God. Right? So Job had been talking about, God being unjust and his mysterious ways. So he says if he can do that job better, if he can, if Job can actually play the role of God better, then he should play God, right? The sense of justice should also be equated with the superiority of power. As God, if he wants that God is just, then he should also understand, he should also have the power to give the justice, right? So God says that, can man play God? Can Job play God? So this demonstrated not only Job's lack of superiority, but also his lack of equality. So is Job God's equal that he calls to book and he questions his justice, right? So God says that whether, uh, Job is equal to God, with, and can he, in his position of submission, actually question the ways of God, right? So this is what is highlighted. It is humbling for Job. Hence, it follows that man is dependent on God and therefore must not question him, even though he cannot fully comprehend his ways. So, that man is actually dependent on God and therefore he cannot question him, because he does not fully understand, fully know what goes on with God's ways. So he questions, God now questions him regarding two animals of creation, which is the Leviathan and the um, Behemoth. So man is utterly powerless to control either of these creations. In fact, if Job was faced with the Behemoth or the Leviathan, he would be completely afraid, right? So then how foolish is it of Job to claim equality with God, who creates these creatures, uh, whom Job cannot even face. So in Job's second reply, he says anyone who not undertake God's work has no right to undermine God's ways. So, he realizes that seeing the creation, seeing the wonders of nature, seeing the overall power of God and justice of God, the knowledge and wisdom of God, he understands that he was wrong in contending with God. His questions, whatever questions that he was raising, that why does God not punish some of the wicked, or any, why is he being unjust, and all of those questions are not answered by God, but finally Job is satisfied. It is unthinkable that this God could even let him down or act inconsistently. So by both the examples, what we've realized is that God cares about people. He knows the best for his creatures, and therefore when Job comes up, when God comes up and talks to Job, he realizes that his faith, his trust in God should not waver at any point. So Job repents, and he repents of his proud rebellion against God, of his insistence that God should respond to him and correct his ways. That is what Job repents on, that he was not right in doing so. So Job then admitted to sinning because he suffered, not to suffering because he sinned. Right? So this notion stands challenged. Whatever we've been doing, whatever we've been saying until now, was that whatever was believed in was that he was suffering because he had sinned. But now he realizes that he was suffering and he sinned in the process of his suffering. So in whatever we see God's compassion, his sovereignty, his power, and this is what is highlighted in the book. Now in the epilogue of the book, God speaks to his friends, and he's angry with them because they have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has, right? So he says that God says that the other friends have not even reached to the point that Job has, right? That they were not even right in their estimation, to the extent that Job is, even though Job has not been fully right himself, right? So, in saying that God is always just, they had limited his sovereignty, right? God can do as he pleases, right? It is not for man to say that he's being just or unjust, but that is what the friends have emphasized on. Therefore, God is angry that in trying to say that God should always be just and God is always just, and therefore he's punishing Job because he has committed a sin. That is something that limits God's sovereignty. To say that he's limited by his obligation to justice is something that does not hold true for God. But now God wants to kind of punish the friends, and here Job intervenes on the part of his friend. Now note that Job intervenes to favor his friends, although his friends have not favored him at all. So it shows the depth of Job's godly character. So they now the friends had constantly been talking of asking forgiveness, Job asking forgiveness from God, but now at this point it is the friends that need to ask for forgiveness from God. Now so we understand that it is the friends who were wrong, and Job had accepted his suffering, and finally he forgives his friends. Now the friends have to ask for forgiveness from both Job and God, and finally Job forgives him, and God by his sovereignty, this is one of the important points that we need to note, that God by his sovereignty can withhold or bestow his blessings as he chooses for purposes only known to him. He is not limited by justice, he is not limited by man's ego, he is not limited by any of those things. And for man, what is man to do? He has to fear God, to have an attitude of awe and humility before God. It is to recognize him as our creator and our complete dependence on God in every sort of uh, ways. So in the last chapter of the book, it records the climax of the long and difficult struggle that Job has with himself, with his wife, and with his friends and God. So at the end, we see that a blameless man like Job has to also humble himself, repent, and expand his knowledge of God, understand his sovereignty. This is the lesson that we get from the book. So, God's ways are incomprehensible to man, but his ways, God can always be trusted. Right, so these are some of the critical points of view. Now, since we are running out of time, guys, I am unable to discuss these, but I'll just mention, some of these anyway. So the three, now Cooper, again, Alan Cooper's essay talks about, that this book is not about, man realizing that God's ways are incomprehensible, right? Because that is already realized in chapter 28. Job already knows this, and everybody else is also talking about this, right? But, when the readers read this book, again, they tend to kind of empathize with Job. We all tend to think that we are, absolutely blameless, and whatever suffering that we have is unjust, and that is why we relate with Job. That whatever, we also question when we are faced with suffering. We also try to question that, why is God punishing us? We have not done anything wrong. So Cooper says that, it is to say here that the providence of man, the fate and the fortune and the understanding of how things work for man and how it works for God is completely different, right? So this is what the book is kind of talking about, but it is not the purpose of the book to end there, right? So this is one of the themes of the book. However, it is not the conclusion of the book. So you see that Satan has not been correct. We've already talked about this, and about the friends and the counselors. All suffering is punishment for sin. This is what they are thinking, right? So we've also discussed this. Now, they have stressed three different aspects of God. Eliphaz has pointed to the distance between God and man, saying that God punishes the wicked. Bildad has stated that God is just and great and that he punishes only the wicked, right? So this is the kind of distinction. Now the questions that you might get may be in these terms, right? Speaking about individual characters, individual dialogues. So Bildad was more severe and less courteous. I'll be sending over the PPT to you. I'll just come to these literary aspects because the other sort of critical comments I've already described. Therefore, I'm not going through each individual slide so that I can also look at your questions in the last 5 minutes of class. So in that sense, the book is called a drama, right? Because and a tragedy, but you can see that it is not a drama of action in terms of not many things are happening in the book, and it is not portrayed dramatically, but it is a drama of dialogue, right? In terms of the dialogues are very dramatic. They create a lot of dramatic tension. Again, another thing is said about the book of Job, that it is a tragedy, which is again untrue, because you see that a person suffers at the end of a tragedy. But here, Job does not suffer at the end of the book. His fortune is all restored. So in that sense, that there is restoration of prosperity for the character, it is a comic resolution that we see at the end of the book, that there is a happy ending. Right, then another thing that is remarkable about the book is the richness of its vocabulary, right? So a lot of words are used for the same thing. 7 words for darkness, and 4 words for sorry, 7 words for darkness. I cannot remember the 4 words for something. So yeah. So another thing is the extensive use of similes and metaphors, which makes the book a very literary, poetic work. So as an example of the brevity of life, you see the weaver's shuttle, one's breath, a cloud, right? We had already talked about the frailty of the spider's web, about the papyrus, right? So you see a lot of similes and metaphors that are being used in the book. So those factors, along with the poetic parallelism, which is 2 lines per verse in the second line, and strophes, make the book of Job, right? So these are the literary aspects of the book, these 5 aspects which make it literary, or which are important from a literary point of view. So Job contains in it, the book of Job contains in it elements of wisdom, drama, lyric, and tragedy. It has an unusual structure combining a lot of literary forms, as we've already talked about, and it is rich poetically. It talks of profound truths, and it has a universal theme about the suffering of man, which makes it fascinating. So it is also regarded, the book of Job is also placed in with the wisdom literature, right, which includes the Old Testaments, the Proverbs, the Ecclesiastics, right, which is something that is important in Christianity, the wisdom literature, right? Of course, again, in the book of Job, you have this passage on wisdom, right? So I'll just finally quickly move through your questions. Okay, I have already talked about prologue is like an introduction. I have already forwarded the PDF of the book to you guys. I will forward the PPT also. Satan is the antagonist. He is the opposite of God. He's the devil. Guys, I have already sent the PDFs and the books to you, but I think some of you may not be a part of the WhatsApp group. Please, synchronize among yourselves. I cannot be sending it to every person individually. Theme and central idea. Theme of the book is regarding human suffering, and the central idea is about the sovereignty of God, right? So the sovereignty, the wisdom, the power, the compassion, the benevolence of God is what is talked about in the book. Yes, the Old Testament is written before the birth of Christ. Okay. Okay, so we have a longer question here. Let me just read it. Whatever God does to us or to our loved ones, we cannot question him because that will be counted as a sin. We should trust him blindly and believe whatever is happening is for something good in itself. Isn't it wrong in a way? I mean, God can judge our faith towards him anytime, but we cannot question his love towards us because that would be counted as a sin. Of course, so my answer to this would be that, these are different points of view about God, religion, theology, right? So it is the view in the Old Testament. And of course, you see that God as the authoritative figure in the Old Testament, as the ultimate patriarch, right? It is, it is something that is counted as a sin, that you cannot challenge the authority of God, right? But we have to also understand that from the literary point of view, what is happening here is that, uh, you know, we are also seeing. So the book is not only telling us that, that God's ways cannot be questioned. It is seen that he can complain, he can question, but he cannot question in such a way that he does not understand, right? So you can question God, you can question God's ways, but we do not also understand his ways, right? So you have, in a sense, of course, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it is about having faith in God. It is about believing in his compassion, because we do not understand why is it, right? Of course, as modern audiences and modern readers, this does not really, make sense to us, right? And we find it very, very, challenging, very problematic also, right? So I would not say that, we have to adhere to this doctrine. We are not here for a religious class. I'm not giving you any sort of religious doctrine. I'm just telling you what is there in the book, what is the book of Job saying. We can choose either to abide by the message or to choose to refuse the message. That is up to us. We are not here for any kind of religious teaching. We are just looking at it as a piece of literature. Therefore, you can always question, right? What is the ultimate lesson of the book also, right? So this is something that you can levy as a question, that, uh, why can we not challenge God? But of course, the final answer to that is that if you believe in religion, if you believe in the authority of God, then, the challenge comes as something that makes you, question the authority. Of course, probably you can, if you can think of examples closer to us, you can think of also that movie, Oh My God, right? To give you just a reference, with Paresh Rawal and Akshay Kumar, what happens? He questions the authority of God, and you see that, finally, when he does not believe in God, then God, to ultimately make man realize his existence, comes up, gives, paralyzes him, and then finally he understands the authority of God, right? So there are various instances where you see that when the authority of God is challenged, then some sort of, response comes from him. But all of these are like literary, religious sort of, religious sort of debates that we do not want to get into when we are looking at just the book as literature, not really as a religious text. Okay. Yes, it is a part of the Bible. The book of Job is a part of the Old Testament. I have sent the PDF to the WhatsApp group. I had also given to you that number, or sorry, that contact for the link for the group. Right, so probably, I don't think now there is a space in the group, but if you have any other questions, then probably, exam pattern, guys, for the exam pattern, you have 5 questions, right? 20 marks. They may be divided into short questions, and there are generally 4 long questions, essay type questions, right? So that is the kind of exam pattern that you have. You have no assignments, you have no internals, you have only your final exams. Right, so I think this is about the book of Job. I'll send over the PPT to you, and tomorrow we'll be doing, the other portion from the Bible, which is the Gospel according to Saint Matthew. Right. So, if you have any other thing to say, or can I end the class now? Okay. So let us conclude today's class. I'll send over the PPT to you. I've already sent the PDF, and you can access the same. Okay, thank you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.